HalluciGen is yet another example of pre-war cruelty and corporate greed. In the fourth game of the series, HalluciGen is presented through one deteriorated and occupied by gunners building. You can enter the building through the basement on the left side of the main entrance or through the front door. Not much changes either way, but if you go in through the main doors, the first thing you notice is a thick greenish fog. And right after that, a squad of gunners viciously fighting each other and obviously not in a very organized state. So let's see what are gunners even doing here. The thing is, a group of about 50 gunners was hired by some very important client to break into HalluciGen's headquarters and search for any valuable pre-war tech. Specifically, the client wanted the Irradiator and Invisivave technologies, and also an access to the company's servers to locate any remaining blueprints and data. The gunners set up a defensive perimeter outside the building and tried to push inside, but then a HalluciGen gas leak happened, and it forced the mercs to tear into each other in a frenzy. Those who survived the leak were soon shot by their own crazed partners. All gunners in the location are hostile to the player, except for one mercenary who has completely lost his mind and sits on the floor near the staircase. He keeps seeing bugs, he thinks the player is unreal, and from time to time he even calls a cat over to him. Some mercenaries locked themselves inside the testing chambers, while others are scattered across the headquarters and serve as the main enemies in the area. You can also find a woman gunner who is not hostile at first, in a first floor room behind an advanced locked door. The gas leak nearly drove her insane, and she can't remember anything. If you convince her to open the door, she'll scream that she has to get out and will simply leave the building. That's basically all there is to say about the gunners, so let's move on what's happening inside HalluciGen headquarters and the more interesting finds. I figured it would be worth organizing the discoveries and known information, as if you explore the location you can find all notes on desks and terminal entries anyway. Before the war, HalluciGen was known as a manufacturer and innovator in biochemical non-lethal technologies for the US police and military use. HalluciGen gas is probably the company's main product, supposedly supplied to the market since 2055. We'll talk about the products in more detail a bit later, but in Fallout 76, HalluciGen gas was used by Poseidon Energy to suppress protest at the mines. Vivian Garam, CEO of Garam Mining, valued human life more than machines, and she received a shipment of gas from HalluciGen, but refused to use it in order to crush riots. And she also didn't replace most of her workers with robots. The gas shipment was bought by Poseidon Energy to suppress the miners' union uprising at reactor WV-06. The protest started because of harsh and aggressive management style. Miners extracting ultrasites at a rapid pace were being replaced by robots for no good reason, losing their jobs and any means to survive. Most of the miners decided to block the reactor's work, which forced the local manager to call the National Guard. The guardsmen used the gas provided by the company, thinking it would make the miners quietly kill each other, avoiding casualties among guardsmen and any reactor staff. But the gas still affected the soldiers as well and turned an ordinary protest into a bloodbath. Since the company was developing substances meant to influence people, it needed test subjects, basically any people at all. And with food shortages causing riots across America, automation, and robots taking people's jobs, HalluciGen didn't exactly lack volunteers. After all, tests were advertised as non-lethal, and the work was paid. If you enter the headquarters through the main doors, you can find a note at reception, recruiting test subjects. The nearby terminal includes extra details. And right in the main lobby, you can also find water that has been laced with chems. The job offer is a note at reception, written in a polite tone, telling potential recruits that the company needs people to test non-lethal police and military technologies, ideal for anyone who needs extra income or is interested in high tech. They lure people in with great pay, flexible schedule, no long-term obligations, and no experience required. It sounds like a fairy tale right in the middle of society sliding into the abyss. Thankfully, that fairy tale is exposed by the hiring procedure you can find, so politely described in a terminal nearby. At first, they will ask you for an ID, like a passport or the driving license, check the testing schedule, and verbally confirm that you are not a client. Then, they offer you refreshments. The test subject is asked to fill out forms 12A through 12H, and it takes long enough for sedatives in the drinks to kick in. After that, the employee hiring the subject notifies the appropriate lab staff that the subject has passed out. Once they receive further instructions, the employee fills out one of the forms: 12I rejection, 12J accident notice, or 12K fatal accident didn't notice. Things inside the company weren't so great either. In one of the offices, you can find a note from Eric. The message, addressed to Paul, says that Eric did everything possible to make sure that feds didn't dodge their obligations, while information was being kept from them. With Damien and few other scientists, he managed to fool the investors and expects Paul, now taught by experience, to make the quarterly reports shine. As the nearby terminal makes clear, the company suffered losses of 1.8 billion, but Paul decides to show revenue of 1.1 billion instead of the losses. Just think about these numbers. Even with 1.1 billion in revenue, HalluciGen still wasn't a profitable company, and in their last quarter they lost $700 million. Investors and the public would never know it. And remember, a quarter is literally 1/4 of the year, meaning they burned 700 million in just 3 months. The only thing Eric cared about was the company's profit, and profit was a huge problem. In his office terminal, you can find a planned schedule of meetings for October 25th, 2077. By the way, the bombs fell on October 23rd. During the day, he was supposed to brief senior staff, review third quarter finances with Paul, have lunch with Damien, check the protocol for human testing, and talk to Dr. Averill, possibly offering water and turning the doctor into a test subject. Also, a very important VIP meeting was scheduled with Colonel Tom Nelson and the key person responsible for the Scythe program. Its purpose was to reclassify civilian enterprises for military needs, integrating them into the US economy. Wilson Automatoys, which used to make toys, started making mines. Perhaps HalluciGen once produced consumer goods, or planned to produce more lethal weapons with army funding, because under the program, companies were literally assigned quotas with budgets that could be insanely large. So, what exactly was being produced in HalluciGen? Inside the headquarters, there are test chambers with gunners locked inside. There's also an observation platform where you can run demonstrations of their products. The observation platform terminal doesn't say much directly, but how reliable their products were is supported by the fact that they prepared an extra distraction demo for when something goes wrong. There's also a marketing presentation for VIP guests in case of catastrophic failure, which basically implied that incidents like this happened often. After certain tests, janitors were supposed to clean the chamber and fully replace it. You can also read experimental results in the basement lab, but I'll summarize the products and what we know about them. Let's start with the Invisivave, the very reason the gunners came here. Invisivave was presented as a kind of stealth boy analog, but in reality it was a completely fake, non-existent technology, literally described as 5 mirrors, 2 hacked stealth boys and a hidden door, a demonstration good enough to convince a Navy admiral. So what the Invisivave really was? It's unclear. Maybe it was meant to create illusory clones of a subject, making the real target invisible. The US Navy ordered the production and installation of 200 units. One note says that in later experiments meant to improve the tech, subjects became silent and impossible to feel by touch, suggesting the effects could be permanent. During the test of this product, every object inside the room simply evaporates, along with the gunners locked inside. The irradiator was supposed to be a portable purifier of biological and chemical contaminants. Instead, the scientists created a 2-ton machine that could remove all chemical and biological elements by applying a small radiation dose of 5,100 rats. For example, using it on test subjects caused skin decomposition and then turned a person into a strange mass. Fortunately, VIP guests would leave the room before that point. And the test chamber is completely cleaned and rebuilt, because it's no longer usable due to the radiation amount. The suppressor was advertised as an effective tool for dealing with criminals, capable of causing temporary paralysis, even in armored targets. It looked like a spiral coil that fires an electrical charge into the target. The suppressor was developed by the same scientist from Implied Hypnotics, who created the Mesmatron, which, in addition to hypnotizing its target, triggered bursts of uncontrollable rage and could partially destroy the skull, causing the head to explode. As you've already guessed, temporary paralysis often became permanent, and all test subjects were delivered to Medford Hospital. The scientist was basically trying to reinvent the Mesmatron, and that made Eric furious. Dispersant is also a gas, somewhat similar to HalluciGen gas, but instead of hallucinations, it causes uncontrollable panic in the subject. In one test, the subject managed to break free and reach the waiting room where his family was, after which he ran off and was found by police 2 days later, scared by his own child. Then he was placed into treatment at a psychiatric hospital. This experiment led to the firing of the scientist who built the Mesmetron, and his replacement by someone named Karen. And the last but not the least, the main product of the company, HalluciGen gas, which you can find in canisters around the location, and once obtained, using a chemistry station, craft grenades filled with this gas. The gas itself was also supposed to be extracted by the gunners, and it was valuable to some unknown client. What are the effects of this gas? It was mainly used via grenades that could not injure anyone with the explosion, but instead they released the gas inside. Originally created in 2055, it kept being improved up until 2077. It caused hallucinations and disorientation feeling in rioters, but on top of that, it led to adrenal gland rupture, spikes of aggression, and adrenaline heart failure, heart attacks, and other unpredictable sensations. The formula was constantly changed, and in one of the last tests, 4 out of 5 subjects suffered hysteria and adrenal rupture. One subject survived the initial exposure, but soon was beaten to death by other 4. Beyond grenades, they also planned to use it as artillery shell, and during testing, the company couldn't even produce proper grenades for the gas, eventually crippling 2 subjects and seriously damaging 1. The player can visit this location by stumbling upon it, via Vault 88 Overseer Barstow's quest, or at the request of Fred Allen from Good Neighbor. Overseer Barstow intends to continue her work for Vault Tech. HalluciGen's formula was supposed to be delivered to the Vault for research, but the Vault wasn't finished in time. All she needs is to test a subject's recovery from the effects of HalluciGen gas. Although the company claims the gas has no side effects, Vault residents can say that they feel depression after they stop using it. Fred Allen, meanwhile, will most likely produce chems using the gas, and will pay you 200 or 400 cups, depending on the check you pass. There isn't much more to say about the company, but there are a few non-obvious points worth discussing. First of all, we should talk about the company's participation in the Scythe program. In a world where war is on the doorstep, survival and protection come first, and civilian needs are pushed aside. Scythe, as we already know from the Wilson Automotoys example, was meant to integrate civilian production into the US Army budget, literally forcing toy manufacturers to make mines. So where does HalluciGen fit into this? It's not very clear. The company presents itself as reliable crowd control solution since 2055, even though internal terminal reports only exist for the 3rd year of operation, and it's hard to call their products reliable, because almost all of them are unfinished, and the only thing you can realistically use is HalluciGen gas. So what happened to the company, and since what year has it really been operating? It's possible that the company absorbed a civilian manufacturer of non-lethal crowd control tools, something like pepper spray producers, and immediately joined the Scythe program. What it did before the acquisition is unclear, but the since 2055 claim and the reliable crowd control branding sounds more convincing that way. It's also possible this is a deliberate, plain lie, told to the VIP guests on the observation platform to boost the corporation's legitimacy. And we can't fully rule out a developer's mistake either, because the game itself doesn't prove either scenario. These are just my assumptions. Keep in mind that bombs fell in 2077, and if you trust the financial data, the company has only been on the market for 3 years, meaning it should have started at around 2075, most likely making pepper sprays at first. If this is a developer's mistake, someone may have typed 2055 instead of 2075, or it could be a voice-over error that nobody noticed. That single slip would give the company 20 extra years of history and add even more inconsistencies into the game's setting. There's also a small question about the gas effect on the player. When you arrive, it literally fills every room in the building, and even with holes in the roof it hasn't vented out. Yet, it doesn't affect the protagonist the same way it affects the gunners. The gas should lose effectiveness after some time in contact with air, while being heavier than air and therefore not venting quickly. Or this is yet another inconsistency. The point is, if it's heavier than air, that should reduce active mixing and slow down the loss of effect. A question also arises about the gunners' lack of organization. There is no support team, no outside guards who could help extract their teammates or provide gas masks. My assumption is that they entered the location and only afterward someone damaged one of the mechanisms and caused the leak, while the main squad was already inside, still leaving nobody outside to guard the perimeter, and having no backup at all. This sounds strange and not very logical. In any case, something more interesting, fuller and clearer could have been happening here. Right now, the place feels rather empty. The setting is intriguing, but the story is raw, and this location could have easily worked as a full side quest with a solid plot, but as it currently stands, it simply is a place to visit, and one more little fragment of lore into the game's world. That's all for now. I hope you enjoyed today's video. Leave a like, drop a comment below, and subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell button. It really helps the channel to grow.